Hello. For my final project, I will be discussing a fluency strategy that focuses on error correction. Throughout this presentation, I will discuss what fluency is, its important connection to reading comprehension, suggestions for improving fluency, and then I will focus on one of those, phrase, drill, error correction, and how to use it. So what is fluency? Fluency, as we have learned about in our courses, is an important skill to being a reader. It is an essential part of the Scarborough's reading rope and combines many different skills together to read a text. As Fuchs et al. Reminds us, oral reading fluency is the oral translation of text with speed and accuracy. And then we also hear from the National Reading Panel describing a fluent reader as someone who can read text with speed, accuracy, and proper expression. So that is all about what fluency is. Now, moving forward about why fluency is an important skill for reading. So overall, the goal of reading is to recognize printed word, also known as decoding, and construct meaning from those recognized words, also known as comprehension. Both of these skills require a great deal of cognitive resources. These resources have to be available for these tasks, but they can be restricted by our memory. If decoding is a difficult skill, it will take up more of that memory, and then little can be left over for comprehension or meaning of the text. Being a fluent reader requires you to have those decoding skills proficient enough to not take up that much memory, so you can use the majority of it to comprehend and interpret what you read. As the National Reading Panel reminds us, for a non-fluent reader, difficulty with word recognition slows down the process and takes up valuable resources that are necessary for comprehension. So we can see the link here between fluency and comprehension. If you can't decode fluently, you can't comprehend fluently. All right, so let's continue on with that learning. As we look at the work of Perfetti, the word reading blocks your working memory from thinking about the text. And again, the National Reading Panel reminds us that students low in fluency may have difficulty getting the meaning of what they read. And as we know, the point of reading something is so you can get some meaning from it. So the combination of the two is very, very important. And just to wrap up that connection, why fluency is important for reading, the statistics that we see on this, especially conducted by Pennell et al., showed that a sample of fourth graders, 44% of those students were seen to be disfluent, even with grade level stories. And that was even with supportive testing conditions. So fluency is key to unlocking the meaning of text. Without the meaning, you are unable to make connections, come up with new ideas, infer about what might happen next, or even learn something new that you can help you learn new words and new ideas. So now that we know the importance of fluency, and it's important that we move forward in what we can do to improve it, because there is things that we can do to improve it. So the National Reading Panel gives us a great guide into what approaches work best to improve fluency. They suggest that reading the text orally with guidance and feedback. They also suggest that it can be done in order to lead to meaningful improvements in reading expertise. This can be done for students who are good readers, but also for those who struggle. So that key part of that is guidance and feedback. So this is what brings me to focusing on error correction. So if we see here, error correction is a direct way to provide feedback and guidance to students when reading a text orally. And error correction can really be a very, very systematic and explicit way to provide that feedback immediately to improve fluency and accuracy. So like the National Reading Panel suggested, we are providing that feedback right away for the student, and it's in a very guided and explicit manner. There are a number of different types of error correction, such as word drill, phrase drill, which we'll focus more on, word supply, and word attack. And like I said, we're going to focus more on the phrase drill error correction for this presentation. So phrase drill error correction, what is it? So when we look at it, it is where after a student has read aloud to you, they're presented with the errors that they have made. They are asked to reread those word errors accurately, but they're asked to read them back in the phrase they were in the text. This is a perfect example of an instructor modeling and prompting the student to repeatedly practice the phrase from which the text includes the word error. This is similar to another great strategy to improve reading fluency, and that's repeated reading. Phrase drill error correction is just as engaging in the same way in that it helps students to practice the correct response in a natural context for reading and prompts the student to repeatedly practice text reading. So phrase drill error correction, now that we know what it is, who is it designed for? This is a great intervention or a great strategy to use with any student that has mastered phonemic awareness and phonics skills, but they still struggle to read words fluently and accurately. And then the really exciting part about this strategy is this can be done with a small group of students. You would obviously be doing it individually, but this would be done in a small group of 3 to 4 students. You take one student at a time, or it can be done on a one-on-one setting, like a tutoring setting. Okay, so now that we know what phrase drill error correction is, and we'll be getting into more of the details of the steps of it later, but let's look at what the research tells us. And this is where I found some really interesting information in regards to some studies that were done. So as we have learned in our classes, research is important in finding a strategy that not only works, but research shows that it's successful as well. So in a study done by O'Shea and the parties involved, 5 elementary students received different corrective feedback procedures to their oral reading errors. The first procedure was simply word supply, which was to supply the word to the student when it was said incorrectly and continue oral reading. Word drill was the second procedure, and that was where they supplied the word to the student, but after oral reading, they were drilled on those error words and phrase. They were drilled on those error words. And then our last one, phrase drill, error correction, is the one that we talked about, where they are given those words again after they've made an error, but they are given those in the phrases in which they occurred. So after seeing these procedures applied, the results showed that phrase drill was superior to word drill because it gave students additional contextual clues provided by reading the error in a phrase. So were given some context when they were having to go back and reread it again. Students were given the ability to not only rehear the recognition of the target word, but also the recognition of the words in the phrase. So it was kind of a double job that it did, which really was very interesting and eye-opening to me. So continuing with the research, there was another study done by Begeni et al., and they just discussed the study of an 8-year-old who was given 6 novel passages to read, and two of the 3 were at different grade levels, and then they used different treatments. So in this study, the treatments were repeated reading, the phrase drill error correction, and then there was a reward. And this reward was just simply an extra toy or extra privilege that the student would receive if they were doing better after they read the passage. So this study, very similar to the other one, but showed similar findings that both repeated reading and phrase drill were equally effective. And they thought it was due to the offer of instructional prompts for the student, immediate student response, and they were provided feedback, which again goes back to what the National Reading Panel suggested, that feedback and that response time. The idea was that the direct support in these weak areas strongly promoted fluency, which is directly supported by doing that phrase drill error correction. Okay, moving forward, let's see how this would work in the classroom. So before you even begin this intervention, the suggestion is to make sure that you know the measure of your students' oral reading fluency by using a universal screener such as the Cadence Reading or FastBridge, just to see a baseline of where they are. After you've began this intervention, the suggestion is to continue progress monitoring with any oral reading fluency measure that you have. Again, those can be supplied through a Cadence Reading or FastBridge. So these are just two things to kind of keep in mind when you're starting to implement them in your setting. And this is just a great quote by Daly et al., another great article that I read, reminding us there's never a guarantee that the intervention will work, and ongoing formative evaluation is the only sure method of determining efficacy. So really just making sure that you are continuously progress monitoring to ensure that this is the best fit for your student. Okay, so kind of the details with phrase drill error correction. The materials you need for this are a student copy of the text, and then a student copy for the teacher, and then a highlighter or a pen. And the teacher copy can be one that you can mark on, obviously, because you're going to be marking down the errors the student has made. But the student copy can be one that is just the book they're reading or the passage. Doesn't have to be a copy necessarily. And then here are the steps for phrase drill error correction. So the first step would be to instruct the student to orally read the passage to you. And as they're reading, you have your teacher copy in front of you, and you are highlighting any words that are read incorrectly. Those are where the errors come into play. And then after the student is done reading, you're going to show them your copy of the passage and words that they said incorrectly. You're going to have the student reread those error words. They're going to read them and then they're going to read them back to you. And then that will give them some practice in that error that they made. But then the part that kind of is a little different with phrase drill is then you tell the student to read the sentences with the words they read incorrectly. And they recommend at least 3 times aloud. So if the student got the word water wrong, they would read the whole sentence that had the word water in it to ensure that they are really getting that, that change in there. And there's a little note down here that just mentions that if the sentence contains more than one word read incorrectly, have the student read each word in isolation first. So if they got water and cup wrong in the same sentence, you would have them read those errors first, and then you would have them read the whole sentence 3 times for practice. And then just some recommendations for when you choose this as a strategy for your students. The biggest thing that I saw in my research and learning about this strategy was that you have to ensure that your text that you're using with your students is at their instructional level. And what that just means is that the student can read the text with 93 to 97% accuracy. And this is just to ensure that the focus is on speed and expression rather than decoding. So you just want to be thoughtful with your text selection. Another piece to keep in mind is to know your students well. If you know that then when you try to correct them when they're reading with their errors and it just does not go well, this might not be the best intervention for them. So just knowing what they're comfortable with and what is going to work to move them forward rather than just frustrate them. And then the last little part, and this could go for any kind of strategy, but especially this phrase drill, would be to walk them through what you're going to do before you actually do the error correction with them. Prepping them in advance can really support them with cooperation and make them feel like they're part of the strategy. And then sometimes what I've done in the past is have another student actually watch you do it with another student if they're really uncomfortable and they're like, oh, I don't know if I can have someone correct me like that. Well, why don't you watch me do it with your friend? Sometimes that can really ease their fears and then also give them some empowerment to try out this new strategy. So when in doubt, just try to see if it works with your students in your setting and see if it works best for you. So these are the works that I cited in my presentation. A lot of really great information. Thank you so much for taking the time to listen to this presentation, and I hope that phrase drill error correction will be a useful tool for you and your students in whatever setting you might be.